Hello everybody, my name is Mike Geig, and welcome to another one of our live training sessions on Unity. This time we will be talking about object pooling, pooling. I pronounce pooling weird, so forgive me for that. It has been a few weeks, so hello everybody. It's been a little bit of time. I hope everybody is doing all right. As always, I will be checking chat while doing the training, so if you have any questions, post them in chat. Please try not to spam or anything like that. Real quick here, like always, before we start, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever, feel free to follow us on Twitter at Unity3D, at Mike Geig, which is me, at Will Goldstone, and at The Ant Ranch. And we certainly love hanging out on Twitter, and yeah. And Twitter validates our existence. So the more followers we get, the better we feel about ourselves. Okay, so yes, everyone in chat is talking about how okay they're doing because Mondays stink. So, sorry, can't change the day of the week. So basically, we're going to be talking about this concept of object pooling. And excuse me, I will try to not be coughing, but I have a little bit of a cough right now, so at least I will turn away from the microphone when I need to cough, and I do apologize for that, so be prepared, because I may start coughing. Okay, so object pooling is a concept of, instead of creating and destroying objects at runtime, creating them all up front at the beginning, and then just using them over and over and over again, just resetting some of their properties and whatnot along the way. This is a good way to approach game development because garbage collection and creating new memory and stuff like that is a very costly procedure. So by avoiding doing that during the game, doing that all during like a loading screen, and then destroying it and letting garbage collection collect it during another loading screen or whatever, you're going to find that you're going to have a much more consistent and smooth experience, and there's not going to be things like memory spikes and things like that that is going to give you a lot of fits. So first off, someone had mentioned a drawing, so I did make a drawing just to kind of help explain object pooling. And basically, object pooling, for me, the way I use it the most is with shooting, right? Shooting guns, shooting, throwing out bullets and stuff like that. That is where I use object pooling the most, because you're always instantiating a ton of bullets and you're destroying a ton of bullets, and that's not necessarily a great way to go about it. You'll remember if you watched my 2D endless side-scrolling platformer tutorial, I also mentioned object pooling there, and so here is where we're going to talk about exactly what I meant. So generally what we have is we have a situation where we create a bullet when a gun fires it and then destroy it after a certain period of time, or after it gets a certain distance or whatever. What we want to do is we want to change it so that we reuse our bullets. So a bullet that has gone off screen is set and made available to refire out of the gun without destroying it and without instantiating it. All right. That is the premise of object pooling, and that's what we're kind of looking to do. So with that in mind, I'm glad you all like my picture there. With that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a real simple example here. So what I have is a very basic game, all right, where you have a spaceship, and the spaceship is going to be shooting a lot of bullets, and in this case right now, the bullets are being instantiated and destroyed. So every time a bullet is fired, it's being created brand new, and every time it goes off screen, it's actually being destroyed, right? And that is not necessarily what we want. Now, you can see that even though we're instantiating and destroying a lot of these, we still have a really solid frame rate, and realistically it's because this game isn't doing anything else, and because those bullets are simple game objects, they're not doing anything in their start method. But if you can imagine, if each one of these bullets had some code in their start method where they initialized themselves or found references, or I mean, this would really bog our game down. So this is a very bad way of going about this, right? And so what we want to do instead is we want to pool these bullets, and this is the example we're going to use. And I kind of want to show you a little bit of how this is set up for starters, all right? So the first things first is we have, let me open up MonoDevelop here. We have a bullet script on each one of these bullets, and it basically, all it does is it moves the bullet. Nothing really to see here, but I just wanted to show you what was on the bullets so you knew, okay? So it's just being moved. The bullets also have this bullet destroy script on them, which basically says after 2 seconds, it's going to destroy itself. 2 seconds is long enough for it to be off of the screen, and you know, that's fine, right? So after 2 seconds, each one of these bullets destroys themselves, okay? And then finally, we have our ship that fires the bullets, all right? And what we have here is we basically have a fire time of 0.05 seconds, and then our bullet object, and then we just have an invoke repeating where we instantiate a bullet, okay? So that's all that's happening here. The ship is firing a ton of bullets, and, you know, they're destroying themselves, okay? So with that setup in mind, what we want to do is we want to pool these objects, and we're going to use a list to do that. Normally we could use an array, but we're going to use a list just so we can kind of have some flexibility with it, and kind of go from there. So what we want to go through is we want to first create a collection of bullets, right, and set them all to inactive, right? And then basically when we need one, we set it to active and fire it, right? And then it will turn itself inactive instead of destroying itself, thus putting it right back into our collection. Real quick here, I'm going to read through the chat because I see we have some questions. Let's see here. Is there a point when instantiate destroy won't hurt your game? You know, if you have just a couple of them, or it's not a ton, or the objects themselves aren't doing, you know, a lot of heavy lifting, then it's fine, right? Instantiate destroy, you know, ultimately you're going to have some of it, and that's not a problem. The problem is when you have thousands and thousands of objects being instantiated and destroyed, or when those objects do really heavy lifting in their start methods or when they're destroyed. That's the sort of stuff that'll kill you, right? So if you run your game and, you know, your objects being instantiated and destroyed aren't a bottleneck for your game, if your game is running fine, then fine, leave it, right? But if you're running your game and you're seeing that your code, your instantiation, your destroy are taking up a large chunk of your game and really hurting, right, then you want to avoid that. So for instance, right, I get about 1,000 frames per second with this demo because the demo doesn't really do anything besides fire the bullets, but I have a 10 frame difference between object pooling and not object pooling, right? So object pooling is about 10 frames faster. Now, when you have 1,000 frames, 10 frames really does not matter. However, you know, there are times when 10 frames really, really does matter. So it's all about your situation and what you need to do. Let's see here. Okay, sorry, I'm just reading through here. Would one of those crazy bullets all over games be a good use for this? Yeah, so crazy bullets all over games, those are like shooter games, or I've heard some people call them bullet hell games. Object pooling is great for those. That's why we have this demo here of the ship shooting all those bullets. It's much better to object pool. Okay, so let's see here. So yeah, basically object pooling is great when you have a lot of things that are being created and destroyed. So you saw my infinite runner where you're jumping from platform to platform, and we kept creating all these platforms and destroying all these platforms. Why not just pool those and save yourself all the creates and destroys, all the power-ups and things like that. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, all right? So anyway, let's get into this and we'll sort of talk about some of the concepts of it as we're working on it, all right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to modify my bullet. All right, not my bullet script where it's just moving. I don't really care about that one. I just wanted to show it to you. But my bullet destroy script, because the very first culprit is that the bullets destroy themselves after 2 seconds, and we no longer want that to happen. Instead, what we want to happen is we want these bullets to just deactivate themselves, right? Just set themselves to not active. That's all we really needed to do. And then they'll stop being updated and whatnot, and we can just reactivate them when we need them. All right, so what I'm going to do is I don't need a start method at all. In fact, I don't want start method. I want to use what's called void on enable. And again, I'll apologize for my keyboard. Some of you are offended by my mechanical keyboard. There's not a whole lot I can do about that. It is loud. Sorry. And so what I'm going to do, whenever the bullet is enabled, not just created, right? Because the start method only happens when it's created, but I'm no longer creating bullets. I'm just activating them after they've been created one time. So we're going to use on enable, which will happen every time they're activated. So when they're activated, I'm going to invoke a method called destroy, which doesn't exist yet, and I'll do that after 2 seconds. So this is like calling destroy on it, but we're going to write our own destroy method, which is actually quite different. So we're going to say void destroy, and in here we are simply going to say gameObject.setActive equals false. There we go. So we're just saying, hey, you're not active anymore after 2 seconds, instead of actually destroying it, right? All right, and then finally, what I need to do is I'm going to say void on disable. All right, so when the bullet is set inactive, I'm going to cancel invoke. And the reason I'm going to do that is to prevent an invoke of destroying it, right? I'll call to this, just sort of lingering, right? I'm going to cancel invoke to prevent it from accidentally, you know, being double disabled and then attempting to enable and then immediately disabling itself, and you going, why is that happening? I'm just going to cancel any invokes that have or that are queued up so that we don't have any issues there. All right. Sorry about that. I warned you about the coughing. All right. Okay. So now, basically, our bullets are done. Okay, that's all they really need to do is set themselves equal to false, or when they hit an enemy, set them equal, or set them inactive, or any time, you know, set them inactive, whatever, right? That's effectively what we want to do. Some of you in chat have complex questions. I can see like multiple paragraphs. I can't answer those right now. Sorry, just because, you know, you can ask later, but right now those will take too long to answer. So, all right. So our bullets are set up. So now what we want to do is we want to modify how we're firing these bullets, right? And so that is our very next step. Our very next step is to begin pooling these bullets. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use system collections.generic, which is going to give me access to the list. Like I said before, I'm going to store these in a list. You may want to store them in an array or whatever your preference is, but I'm just going to use a list because people are generally familiar with those, and I like them. So that's what we're going to do. And so we need to determine how many objects we're going to pool to begin with. And so I'm going to say public int pooled amount. I might say amount of bullets or whatever. And let's say we're going to allow 20 bullets, which means when the game starts, we're going to create 20 bullets and put them in this collection. Now, that means two things. One, if your game ever only uses 5 bullets at a time, that means 15 bullets are going to be wasted memory. And this is true, right? They're going to be instantiated but never used. Okay? So you kind of want to get your pooled amount to be close. However, even though we have some wasted memory, what's not going to happen is the garbage collection isn't going to be called at random times, and we're not going to have spikes of memory. We're not going to have objects in memory all over the place. We're going to have one consistent use of memory the entire time from these objects, which means once it's allocated, it just sits there allocated. And assuming we're not dealing with huge objects that take up tons of memory, this is not a problem. It's much better to have too much memory allocated to objects that aren't changing very often, as opposed to having the exact amount of memory but constantly having to allocate new memory and deallocate that memory, and that's very inefficient, right? So object pooling on devices with very limited memory, you might have to be careful, but for like 99.9% of everything you're ever going to do, it's a good idea to have a solid amount of consistent memory usage, and that's what we're going for here. All right. So, actually, someone just asked, is object pooling effective for mobile platform with low memory? Yes. Don't overdo it, right? Don't pool like billions of objects when you only need like 10. But yeah, I mean, object pooling is really good for mobile because mobile CPUs tend to be really not great and not very fast, right? And so object pooling saves CPU time. If you find that you have a game that's CPU bound, and what I mean by that is your low frames per second is due to CPU and not GPU, not due to rendering but due to calculations, object pooling can help with that a lot. And so object pooling is great for mobile, almost mandatory for mobile, so just keep that in mind. What I did when I tested this is I ran it in a browser, and running it in a browser with limited capabilities as well is another great way to see how much object pooling can help you. Okay, so I have my pooled amount here, so now I know how many bullets I'm able to fire at a time. And I'm also going to have a list of type GameObject, which I'm going to call bullets. All right, and that is basically just going to be my pooled list of bullets. And then what I'm going to do in my start method is I'm going to go ahead and pool those. So I'm going to say bullets, which is my list of bullets, equals new list. List. That's what I want. Of game objects. So I'm just instantiating a list. It's not a big deal here. And then I'm going to say for int I equals 0. I is less than pooled amount. And I spelled that wrong. Pooled amount. I plus plus. So we're just going to create all of these objects. I'll create a temporary holder, which I'm just going to call game objects, or which a temporary game object holder, which I'm just going to call obj, and that's going to equal game object I'm just casting here, instantiate. What am I going to instantiate? I'm going to instantiate a bullet. All right, just like that, nice and simple. I'm just instantiating a bullet, and I'm setting it into obj. And then obj, I'm going to say set active equals false. I'm not using it right now, I'm just pooling it for later. All right, and then I'm going to add it to my list, bullets.add obj. There we go. So now my bullets have been pooled. Okay, which means when this game starts up, my ship is going to create 20 bullets, put them in a pool, and now they're just ready to be used. They're just sitting there like bullets in a magazine of a gun. They're just sitting there ready. They just haven't been used yet. All right. Okay. One of the questions: how many objects can you pool together? You can pool, I mean, as many objects as you want or need, but basically, you want to avoid pooling different types of objects together, right? Because then you're going to get into some weird code. And you basically, what we're using is we're using polymorphism to make this work, and you can use more polymorphism to have different types of objects in there, but then the code gets crazy. You have to make sure that the right object is both inactive and of the right object before doing anything with it and stuff like that. So we're going to look at, after this, we're going to create a generic pooler class that you guys can build off of to do more robust pooling. So this is just my solution, and then we're actually going to build off of that to create a pooler. Yeah, stuff like that. So, all right. So here I've now successfully pooled my bullets, right? I've created my list, and I've created 20 bullets and put them in that list. This part is effectively done. My start method is finished, and now I'm going to start firing bullets really, really quickly. So the rest of the work comes here in my fire method. Sorry about that. And so what I'm going to do is every time we need to fire a bullet, I need to find one that's not currently active. I obviously do not want to fire bullets that are already active. And so what I'm going to say is for int I equals 0, I is less than pooled amount. And then actually instead of what I'm going to do, instead of pooled amount, is I'm going to say bullets. That's weird. Stop messing me up. Bullets.count. Alright, I plus plus. So this is just going to loop through this list, and I'm going to say if not bullets sub I dot active in hierarchy. So that means that this bullet is not currently active. I'm looking for an inactive bullet because that's the one I'm going to fire. So if the bullet dot not, or if not bullets sub I dot active in hierarchy, then I'm going to fire it. And the way I fire it is this. I'm going to say bullets sub I, and I'm actually just going to copy this because I say it a bit. Bullets sub I dot transform dot position equals transform dot position. All right, the position of the ship, right? That's what I want. I want it to be fired from the ship. And then I'm saying bullet sub I dot transform dot rotation, and that's going to equal the transform dot rotation again of the ship. So the bullet is fired the way the ship is facing. And then finally bullet sub I dot set active equals true. That's going to activate my bullet, and now it's going to go flying off into space because it's a bullet. And then break because I don't want to activate a whole bunch of bullets. All right. So at this point, our object pooling is done. I mean, it was just a little bit of code, and now we have a ship that pools its own bullets and fires a whole bunch of them, and is handled from there, right? Excuse me. Sorry about that. Let me read through chat here real quick. So people are just saying, is this only for bullets? You can spawn enemies this way, platforms this way, particles this way. Anything that you need to create a lot of and destroy a lot of, object pooling is how you do it. I'm doing it right now with bullets, but you can do it with anything. You can do it with enemies, spaceships, whatever. All right, as much as you want, because we're just basically pooling objects and then activating those objects, and then they're going to do whatever they want, right, or whatever they're set up to do. All right, so our object pooling is effectively done. Let's go back to Unity here and let's run it. Make sure I don't have any errors first. I don't. Cool. So now what we're going to see here is if you look over here, you're going to see that I have these 20 bullets. You're also going to notice that it's not firing consistently. All right. The reason it's not firing consistently is because I only have 20 in my collection, and obviously 20 is not enough. Okay, so what I could ideally do is I could ideally write a piece of code that that allows my collection to expand, right, to accommodate how many I need, which we will do, but we're not going to do right yet. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to my spaceship, I'm going to pick an amount, and I'm going to say, realistically, I've already tested this, and I know that I need 41, right, but I'm going to do 45, just so you can see some of the inactive ones. So now we have 45 bullets, we got a nice consistent flow. You also see that we have a few bullets right here, namely 4 bullets, that are in reserve. So if for some reason I needed to fire 4 more bullets, I would be able to do so. All right. So this is effectively a pooled object ship. Now I know we have a lot of these bullets in memory, and if the ship is not currently firing, right? Like if I unclick that, oh, it's not going to allow me to do that in real time. Because it's an invoked statement, so yeah, never mind. But if the ship were to stop firing, these would all just sit there in memory, right? Which is unfortunate that they're going to sit there in memory and take up that memory. But at the same time, the memory usage is minimal compared to the CPU usage of instantiates and destroy. All right. All right. Now let me stop this here. So let's see. All right. So this is. Yeah, Mike, what if you need more bullets than you have pooled? We're going to make our next class so that it auto expands to be what we need. Now, please, those of you in chat, this is not a conversation about all the different game engines. So please stay on target so we can talk about object pooling. And if you can't do that, I will be forced to ban you just because it's distracting, and I'm really trying to show everyone object pooling. So now. What we want to do is we want to create our own object pooler, right? So we saw how we can put object pooling on the ship, but what if we wanted to create a more robust generic class that we could use to pool anything, right? And that's what I'm going to show you how to do. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to create, basically first off I'm going to create a script for this. And so what I'm going to say is C#, and I'm going to say, I'm going to call it the new object pooler script, only because I have an object pooler script already in this folder, and if I try to create 2 of the same name, it's going to give me fits. So I'm calling it the new object pooler script. All right, and this script is going to be kind of our generic method of pooling objects. All right, and so a lot of the code from our bullet fire script is actually just going to be reused here in our new object pooler script in a more generic fashion. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to create a public static new object pooler script instance of itself. We'll call current. All right, this way we don't necessarily have to keep a reference to this all the time. We can just get it using its static link. All right, and then what I want to do is I'm going to say public game object, which I will call pooled object. Since we're treating this generically, this isn't necessarily for bullets, right? It could be for enemies or UFOs or buildings or whatever. And so public game object pooled object right there. That's going to store it, whatever it happens to be. And then we're also going to say public int pooled amount, and we'll say equals 20. All right, just seems a reasonable amount. And then finally, this part is new. We're going to say public bool will grow. And will grow is a Boolean that basically determines if I call for an object and there isn't an available one, do I create a new one and put it into my pool, right? So this allows my pool to expand based on the demand of the game. And the nice thing about this is it allows my game to build up its object pool. The problem is it doesn't shrink down. So if you have a spike, your object pool is going to get big and then it's going to stay big, right? So that is something to keep in mind is how much spikiness exists in your game. All right, so now that we have these, the final thing that we need is we need our list, and before I can do our list, we need to include the generic system collections. So I'll create a list of game objects, game object, which I will just call pooled objects. All right, just like that. And then a lot of this is going to be similar to the spaceship firing, right? So the first thing I need to do is instantiate my list, and I actually don't need an update function in here, so just a little bit of cleanup. And so what I need to do is I need to say pooled objects equals new list. Oops, new list of game objects. I cannot type today. All right, and then very much like the other class with the spaceship firing, I'm going to say for int I equals 0, I is less than pooled amount, which is not showing up, whatever. The autocomplete in this sometimes does not work very well. Pooled amount, and then of course I'm going to do the exact same creation code as I did in the previous one, where I instantiate an object, cast it to a game object, and store it in a variable named obj. So I will create an object of pooled object, store it in obj, set obj to false, or set its activity to false, and then put it in my list. So very generic. This is basically how the other code did it, is we're just creating our list, and then we're going through and creating as many objects and adding them to the list as our pooled amount. All right. So nothing really new or interesting or crazy there. We kind of saw how that worked before. All right. Real quick here, one of the questions. So can I create a condition to limit how many objects I can create and dynamically increase them by the level of the player? Absolutely. Just set a maximum pooled amount, and then you can increase that, and then will grow if it has the ability to, right? So yeah, that's absolutely possible. All right. Okay, and so there's our start method. All right. And so now we just need one more public method that is going to enable us to get an object, right? And so I'm going to say public game object, and we're going to name this get pooled object. Just going to return back a pooled object. All right, and we're going to say for int I equals 0, I is less than pooled objects. I don't know why in for loops that stops working, then the autocomplete. I don't know, always in for loops. So we're just going to loop through our collection of objects, and we're going to say if pooled objects, apparently doesn't work in if statements either, pooled object sub I dot active in hierarchy. So if it's inactive, then what we're going to do is we are going to return it, basically. Return pooled objects sub I. Now, we don't need a lot of solutions that I've seen in the past actually pop the object out of the collection and send it off, and then have them return back, and it puts them back into the collection. That's completely unnecessary. You do not need to remove the object from the collection when it goes active. And the reason you don't need to do, or the reason you don't want to do that is pulling out of a collection and then putting back into the collection is really costly. All right? If you think about it, if all of these are contiguous in memory and I pull one out of the center, then all the other ones need to be shifted down. Now, if this, I don't know C#'s implementation, I would assume that this is something along the lines of like a linked list, right? Or maybe probably a doubly linked list. So it can just reassign those pointers, but at the same time, that's still work that you don't have to do. So instead of pulling it out, we're just going to return the object itself. It's still in this list, and since game object is a reference, you're just passing the memory address around, so it's lightweight and it's easy, and we don't necessarily need to do a lot of maintenance on our list. So if you see some solutions where it has like, you know, the pooled objects dot remove at, and it pulls it out, and then actually, you know, you don't need to do all that junk, right? We just basically need to return it, leave it in the list, so that when we set it disabled, it's just available again, right? So that's the easiest way to handle that. All right. And so then I'm going to say, so this will return one if one's available. If one's not available, we need to handle that. So I'm going to say if will grow. All right. So basically, this will only fire off if it didn't find a pooled object. Otherwise, the return statement will remove us out of this function. So if the return statement doesn't fire off, we have to see, hey, is this able to grow? If it's able to grow, then what we need to do is we need to say game object obj equals game object instantiate. You all remember this bit. Pooled object. So we're going to instantiate a new one, and then we're going to say pooled objects dot add obj, and then return obj. So we'll return that pooled object. Finally, If it didn't find an active or an inactive one, and we're not allowing it to grow, then I'm just going to return null. To say, hey, look, we're out of objects, and, you know, and we're not allowed to create new ones. So this is our generic pooler class, and basically what this means, it means that, you know, we can effectively have these object pools that consist of whatever, right? We can put whatever we want. I happen to put bullets in there, but you can put sort of whatever you want in there, right? One question here: why is there not two separate lists for activate and deactivate? That would eliminate searching. You're correct, Dark Chowder. The problem is searching is so much more efficient, right, than activating and deactivating, or than managing two different lists, right, and removing from one and putting in the other. Searching is actually really, really fast, so we search, right, because A, it's not a maintenance issue, right, we don't have issues of objects accidentally not being re-added to it, we don't have to figure out which list is which, you know, we don't need to know all that crap, and B, searching is just fast, right, so we search, okay. And so one of the questions, who decides will grow? Will grow, since it's public, will be a checkbox in the editor. So you get to decide whether or not you want it to grow. Then let's see here. Should you need to activate the object? No, we're returning the object to whatever called for it, and we're going to leave it up to that to activate it. Because we don't want to activate it until we put it where we want it, or because what happens if when the object becomes activated, unenabled is called, and what if it like pulses out and finds objects near it? What if it activates before we put it where it needs to be? That's no good. So we're going to let whatever object requests this game object, we're going to let that object handle it. All right? Why are we casting pooled object to game object? We're not. We're instantiating an object, which is going to be an object, not a game object, and then we're casting that object to a game object. And that's what we're getting here. So that's effectively what's happening. Why is your voice so beautiful? I don't know. I actually have kind of a cold right now, so maybe that's what it is. But enough about me. So our object pooler is done now. This is the bit of code that we need. And if you're watching along later, this will be posted later. You can just pause it and you can check out the code again. So now what we need to do is we need to check bullet destroy script. Nothing needs to change here, right? This is just setting it not to active. Cool. Don't need to touch that. Here's where we need to make the biggest changes in our bullet fire script. And even now, it's really not that big of a change. So what we can do is we can just ignore all this stuff. We don't need it anymore. And we can just ignore all this stuff. We don't need it anymore. And in fire, all we really need to do is get rid of all this junk. And then unindent these sections. And what we need to do is we need to say game object obj equals new object pooler script dot current. Remember, because we did that static, that public static right here. We have this public static pointer to itself where we set that up. Ooh, and I accidentally forgot to set that up. I'm glad I went back to look at that, or else that would have given us an error. I'm going to do void awake, and in awake I'm going to say current equals this. That would have given me a problem. So good job, guys. Thanks for catching that for me. Appreciate that. That works. All right. So now that we have that, now that we can just say current, and that pulls this script without a reference or anything, right? Makes it nice and simple. So we're going to say current dot get pooled object. So this is going to give us a bullet, all right? Or it's going to give us null if there's no more bullets and it's not allowed to grow. So the very first thing we need to do is we're going to say if object equals null, return. Because if we didn't get a bullet back, that means we cannot fire a bullet. And then finally, we just need to say obj dot transform obj and obj. There. So at that point, once we have an object we know is good, we're simply going to set its position to the ship's position, its rotation to the ship's rotation, and then set it active. So that will fire the bullet. So at this point, our ship is now ready to use our object pooler as well, right? So you see how easy this is. And now, not only can this ship fire these pooled bullets, any ship can fire these pooled bullets. So let's assume that the good guys and the bad guys all use the same bullet, which is actually a really good optimization to do if you're making like a bullet hell game or a game where a lot of people shoot. Just make everyone use the same bullets, and then you can just have one big pool of like 100, and everyone just fires from that pool, and you have no issues, right? And it's all pooled, right? It becomes very, very simple. So yeah, I mean, this is basically pretty simple. Someone said, can you do this in JavaScript as well? Yes, you can. You can do this in JavaScript just the same. I'm not super familiar with all of JavaScript. I kind of know the syntax, so I don't know if they have lists or if just their arrays are resizable or something like that. So you'll need to use the JavaScript equivalent, but the idea is the same for all of these. All right. So yeah, basically real simple. Okay, someone asked, kind of tangent, but is there a performance issue with not using static and setting up references for different things? Not really, but then you just have to manage all those references, and that kind of becomes a pain. So yeah, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but then you have to do it, right? And that's kind of a pain in the butt. Okay, so we have our object pooler. We have our bullet destroy, which we didn't need to change, and we have our ship firing scripts. So let's pop back into Unity now. All right, and what I need to do is I'm going to create an empty game object, which I'm just going to call object pooler, and I'm going to put my object pooling script on it, just like that. And ideally what I could do is I could make this a prefab, this object pooler. I can just make a prefab like that and then just put it in a scene whenever I need it. And just by doing this, actually, I have a generic object pooler that I can use over and over and over again for a bunch of different games, right? Because I can put whatever I want in here, and it's going to create a bunch of those, right? And so that's kind of cool. And so there's my object pooler. And so now all I really need to do is I need to take my object pooler and I need to set it to fire bullets. And there's 20 of them. We can also see that it will grow. So let's see what happens now when I run this. Okay, so it's firing. All right, and you can see that it's also expanding. All right, so not only, oh, I meant to pause it. Sorry about that. Actually, let's do one more thing here so I can show you something. I'm going to come back to my new object pooled script. You don't need to do this if you're following along, but I'm just going to make the list public. I'm only going to make the list public so you can see it grow. All right, so let's come back here, give that a second. So we have our pooled objects. So we're actually going to be able to watch this grow. Because remember, if it's at 20, and I'll actually leave this unchecked, right? We're going to play it. It's going to get to 20. And it's going to do this thing like we saw before. Now watch what happens when I click will grow. We're going to see that it's going to dynamically resize. All right, to 41, like I told you. And so then it stops growing. Okay, so it automatically increased its size to be exactly where we needed it to be, and then kind of stopped there. Interestingly enough, the FPS here says like 840, but over here it's like 1200 to 2000, kind of fluctuates around in there. So something is obviously different, but that's the graphical frames per second, and this is the CPU frames per second, so it's probably a little different there. But you get the idea now, right? So basically, we have a very generic object pooler that we can use to do all sorts of stuff. Okay, so at this point, that's basically what I wanted to talk about with object pooling. It's really not all that difficult, and it's really not all that scary, right? You just sort of have to do it, right? So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to answer all of these super long questions that I didn't get a chance to answer before. So please feel free to post your questions now, and sorry I didn't get a chance to get to them. Let's see here. One question, so is it a good practice for pooling multiplayer bullets in the server side to avoid player hacking? Now, I know nothing about game security, like literally nothing, right? Like you could ask a rock and it would know more than me. And so I don't know if object pooling is good to prevent hacking, but object pooling is good for efficiency, and I know multiplayer games are all about efficiency, so I'm going to say yes, just for efficiency's sake, but I don't know about security, so maybe we'll give that one half a thumbs up. I don't know. Let's see. I think it would be best not to instantiate the objects to a specific number, but just to have the list instantiate when fired, stored in the list as soon as the object leaves camera, start reusing. Yeah, I mean, basically, that's kind of what we do with the will grow, but it's a good idea to pool as much as possible in the start method when this thing first starts up, just to avoid having to do it while the game is running. Why not pool all your big, collections of objects behind a loading screen, right, and not worry about it right away, right? So yes and no. I mean, you can do it that way, but that kind of defeats some of the purpose of pooling. All right. Let's see here. Sorry about that. Let's see. Presumably, you can't use the static current if you want to have multiple pools using this class. Absolutely correct. So, well, that's not true. It depends on how you use this. So, basically, I've shown you this generic object pooler, right? And you can use it for whatever you want to use it for. That being said, if you want to pool more than one type of object, you're going to need to do some work to kind of make it a little more robust, right? So, you could have a collection of collections, right? So, you could have an object pooler that has basically an array or a list of lists, right, that of different types. And that's certainly one way you can do it. Other ways is you can have different types of poolers, so on and so forth. So, you know, it really all depends on what type of game you're making and how much you need to pool, right? If you only need to pool bullets, it doesn't make sense to have this really heavy, difficult to use object pooler. But if you need to pool like 20, 30 different objects, then obviously this solution isn't going to work for you and you need something a little more robust. So, I kind of made it simple so that you can modify it however you want to do whatever you want, right? And I know that's kind of a cop-out, but that's why I did it. So, so it really depends. If you need to pool a whole bunch of different type of objects, you'll need to make this more robust either by having different types of this class or by having a list of lists or something along those lines. And whether or not you can use the static variable current is determined by which way you tend to go with it. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, just reading through these because now we're looking at a lot of answers to questions. So sorry. Why did grow stop at 41? Just that's how many bullets it needed. It didn't need more than that. Are there any other examples where pooling can be used except for reusing bullets when it gets to the edge of the screen? Tons of examples. Like I already said, enemies, buildings, if you have multiple buildings, power-ups, platforms, whatever, right? Use your imagination. There's tons of examples on the internet. Okay, I'm kind of caught up here. Are touch events pooled? They're stored in an array. I don't know if we consider those pooled. They're stored in an array, so not really, no. Where can we suggest topics for new live training? My Twitter account is great for that, or on the forums. Or by the way, I did create a forum post for today's live session, which I've never done before, so feel free to check it out and say you were here. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that's a good place as any to put recommendations. By the way, when you turn the enable back to true, the variables... Okay, so here's a good question. So the question is essentially, I disable a bullet when it takes 2 seconds, right? Where is the bullet? So if I re-enable the bullet, where is it, right? And so if I disable a bullet when it's, I don't know, at a Y position of like 100, when I re-enable it, it's going to be at that Y position of 100. The properties of it are not reset. So one part of object pooling is before I re-enable the bullet or the enemy or whatever, I have to reset it, right? I have to be like, hey, you're at this position, which is actually why I do the, when I fire the bullet, I set the position and rotation, right? In case, because I don't know where that bullet was, all I know is where I need it to be now, and so I need to reset that stuff. So that has to happen. Otherwise... all right, you're going to have stuff all over the place. You're not going to be able to find it. So, yes, it retains its state when you set it to inactive. It retains whatever its state is. When you set it back to active, that's where it is, right? And that, you know, could be problematic. Let's see. Is there an association between an instance of a game object and the prefab it came from? The context is, if I pass a game object to the object pool, can it figure out which prefab it belongs to? I'm trying to make a very generic pool that has a dictionary of pool and use the prefab reference as the key. Easier than using the prefab reference as the key? Why not just the name? Or give it a tag, right? I can just take my bullet and tag it as, like, say, bullets. I don't have a bullets tag right now, but I could create one. So I could go ahead and try to figure out what prefab it is, or I can just compare their names or their tags, right? And that'll work just as well. But yes, the bullets should know that they come from a prefab. So I guess that to answer your question there. Let's see here. Let's say I shrank a collider when I set it to active while in the game. When I deactivate it and then activate it again, how do I set the collider to its original state? Well, you shrank the collider. I assume you can grow the collider. So that's how, right? You set it one way, just set it back. Let's see here. Will the code you just wrote be available for download? I don't have a means of getting stuff to you for download, so you'll just have to watch the video and just write it down. And I know that kind of stinks, but I don't have a method of getting it to you, so my apologies. Let's see here. His recording quality is very bad. Hello. Well, hello. I assume you mean me. I'm sorry. Let's see. How would I use this with game objects which are synced over a network? Is a network view still sending if the game object is disabled? I don't know. That's a good question. I would assume not. I assume that we do not pass disabled game objects over network views. But the fact of the matter is once it becomes re-enabled, then it'll appear again. So I think that'll work for you. I've not tried it, so you might need to do a little discovery on your own, or just email me later and I can look into it for you. Let's see. Oh, someone says here, you're not supposed to go and turn every instantiation in your game into a pooling. It's used on items that are instantiated very frequently. You don't have to do, or you don't have many situations like that, but when you do, it's a very useful technique. Exactly. I wouldn't object pool the player, because there's only one of them, right? So I am instantiating them effectively, because they exist in the scene. But if I needed to instantiate a new one, I wouldn't pool that, because it's very rarely created. But for bullets, there's tons of them. Let's see here. So if it's like allocating memory, is there a way to deallocate the memory? Again, not really. Well, you could. We could write code that can decrease the size of our pool, but that's really not super necessary. If it becomes necessary, you might have to write that code, but it's really, really not common for that to be a problem. Let's see here. Oh, can I show the fire script? Absolutely. And then the Fire Nation attacked. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so that appears to be all of the questions. It's all the people telling me to post on, like, you know, all these different websites. I prefer to not, only to keep things official. So yeah, but anyway, that seems to be all of the primary questions. Is there any difference between changing an object while it's enabled or disabled? My personal, the way I use it is I reset all my objects while they're disabled and then enable them once they're ready. Because you never really know what's going to be in an object's unenabled function, right? Maybe something important that has to do with its location exists in its onEnable function. So if you enable it before placing it where it needs to be, you could have problems. So yeah. Okay, so that appears to be all the questions. I guess I'm going to repeat myself for the third time there. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. I know it's a little shorter than usual, so all of you who are on your lunch break or whatever, you can get back to work early and be productive and get a raise and then buy an island and invite me over sometime. I won't show up, though, because I have a natural fear of violence. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to message us on Twitter at Unity3D, at Mike Geig, which is me, at Will Goldstone, and at The Ant Ranch. As always, feel free to message us, questions, comments, concerns, whatever, invitations to an island, sure. And yeah, thank you all very much for coming. I see some people are talking about multiplayer networking. We'll have to see. My schedule is a bit busy. We're trying to get some more people to do the live stuff and not just me, so that we can have a more consistent schedule. So hopefully we will get to that. So anyway, just look on our live training site. We'll have some more stuff posted soon, but right now it's just a little hit or miss. So all right, you all have a fantastic week.